but he was subject to a violent and shocking death and execution. Join us today as we look at the brutal execution of Gaddafi, and remember to support our channel. Please make sure to subscribe. Gaddafi was born in a tent in the Libyan desert, and no one would have predicted how he rose to prominence. At university he was a talented student, and then he began to plot to overthrow the Libyan monarchy. He graduated from the Libyan Military Academy in 1965, then rose through different promotions, and he had a goal in mind to overthrow the government and to stage a military coup. On the 1st of September 1969 he seized control of the government in the military coup that deposed the king Idris I. He became the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces, and chairman of the new governing body in the country, the Revolutionary Command Council. He removed the US and other countries from military bases in the country the following year, and expelled large amounts of people from Libya, and then he nationalised all foreign-owned petroleum assets in the land. In accordance with his religious beliefs, he also banned alcohol and gambling, and was opposed to negotiations with Israel. He became a tough negotiator, and his government were involved in a number of coup attempts in Sudan and Egypt, and they were meddling in the long civil war in Chad. Gaddafi became known for being unpredictable and erratic, and his government financed a number of groups with revolutionary ideas, including even the IRA in Northern Ireland. Libyan spies would assassinate opponents and dissidents abroad, and his government were involved in a number of terrorist incidents inside of Europe. He came into conflict with the American government, and in April 1986, a force of British-based American warplanes bombed sites in Libya, and even killed and wounded some of Gaddafi's children. But they missed a key target. As mentioned, he was involved in the Lockerbie bombing over Scotland, which destroyed a civilian aircraft, killing 270 people on board. He faced sanctions for this and further isolation, but then later, as the 21st century came around, Libya announced it would drop its unconventional weapons programme, and many of the sanctions were then lifted. Gaddafi was trying to rehabilitate his image, and he was then elected the chairman of the African Union in February 2009. But in February 2011, anti-government demonstrations forced presidents from power in neighbouring Tunisia and Egypt. Then anti-Gaddafi demonstrations broke out in Benghazi. Protests then spread throughout Libya, and Gaddafi's regime tried to brutally put them down. He ordered direct fire of live ammunition at protesters, and they were attacked by fighter jets and helicopter gunships, and this was condemned all around the world. The violent tactics showed that he had not changed, and a number of ministers defected and then supported the uprising. On the 22nd of February he appeared on television and gave a defiant speech refusing to step down, and he called the protesters traitors. But his leadership seemed weak, and by the end of February the protesters had taken large parts of land, including they managed to encircle Tripoli. Gaddafi remained in control but was living in isolation, and he insisted he was still well loved, and he believed that Al-Qaeda were behind the opposition. Further pressure called for him to step down, then the UN stepped in, imposing a travel ban and arms embargo on him, and they freezed his family's assets. In some areas his forces did regain lands, but then the UN Security Council voted on the 17th of March to take military action in the country to protect civilians. Because of this, NATO launched an air campaign and significantly damaged Gaddafi's forces, but this eventually led to a stalemate. Further high-profile defections occurred, and Gaddafi continued to refuse to step down. On the 30th of April, a NATO airstrike killed his youngest son and 3 of his grandchildren, but Gaddafi was in the house at the time of the attack. Whilst this was also happening, war crimes charges were being drawn up against his regime, and there were arrest warrants issued for him along with his son and the intelligence chief. A lot of these charges and accusations revolved around the orders to fire on civilian protesters. But then in August 2011, Tripoli would fall as rebel fighters took control of large areas, and they then captured his headquarters and ransacked the compound. Gaddafi's whereabouts were unknown, and rumours were that he was with heavily armed loyalists in Sirte. He refused to leave and flee or give over power, but then the last loyalist district of Sirte fell and he decided to flee. At 8:30 on the 20th of October 2011, the loyalists tried to escape in a convoy of 75 vehicles, and the fast-moving convoy with Gaddafi in it was spotted, and NATO intercepted a call made by the leader. Then NATO fired on 21 of the vehicles, destroying one, and an American Predator drone fired, and then French fighter jets continued the bombing. They killed dozens of loyalists, and after the first strike the convoy split up, and rebel units on the ground also attacked. NATO claimed they did not know Gaddafi was in the convoy, and that they were not involved in the capture. Following the airstrike which destroyed the vehicle in front of Gaddafi's car, he and his son took shelter in a nearby house, which was then shelled. Muttasim, his son, then with 20 fighters went on the lookout for undamaged cars, and it was said the group belly-crawled to a sand berm, looking for a way to escape. One of the guards threw a grenade, and then it hit a concrete wall and fell in front of Gaddafi, and a guard then picked it up and it exploded, killing 2 people. But it was time to hide for the former leader, and he hid out in a large drainage pipe with a number of his bodyguards. A nearby group opened fire, and they wounded Gaddafi in the leg and back, and there were rumours that one of his own bodyguards shot him to avoid being captured and being tortured, being taken alive. However, he was then ordered out of the drain, and he got out slowly, and he was then dragged up to his feet. A UN report claimed there was a different story of events, as he had been wounded by fragments of the grenade, and this shredded his flak jacket. Apparently he was on the floor dazed and in shock, and bleeding from the head, and then one of his groups surrendered. But after his capture he was killed. Different reports of this exist. One said that he said, "Please don't shoot," before he was shot by rebel fighters. He was questioned before and denied any involvement, and one fighter ordered him to stand up, and he could not do so. In one video he said, "God forbids this, and do you know right from wrong?" when his captors shouted at him. He was also seen lying on the front of a car, and it said no official execution order was given to execute Gaddafi. It was also said they captured him alive, and whilst he was taken away, they beat him and killed him. Another account said, when the car was moving, it was caught in crossfire between the revolutionaries and Gaddafi's forces, in which he was hit by a bullet in the head. What is certain, though, is that he was set upon by Misrata fighters, who wounded him with a bayonet in the backside, and then began to pummel him with kicks and fists. It's believed that he was also shot. But by the time he was placed in an ambulance, his body was lifeless, and it's believed he had been killed at this moment. Many people posed for photographs with his remains, and he was stripped and also verbally abused. A doctor's official examination said he had been shot in the head and also the abdomen. But then his body was placed on public display to allow the people of Libya to see their former dictator dead. His body was placed in an emptied public freezer in Misrata, and thousands travelled to see it. One said that he had a number of gunshot wounds which had residue on them, showing he had been shot dead at close range. His body was also displayed alongside his son's, and then the remains were passed over to his family, and they were buried in a secret location. Gaddafi's death was one of the most shocking of the 21st century, and much of his final ordeal was captured on mobile phones, and the world's media then showed his downfall. He was a man who rose from humble beginnings to become one of the most shocking and violent dictators of the 20th century, and in the aftermath of his death, a number of his supporters wounded and tortured one of the men who captured him. They tortured this man for days, and this showed the anger that many had towards his killing, especially those who remained loyal to him. Gaddafi was a man who was a violent and oppressive dictator, whose stronghold over Libya lasted for decades. Thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.